It's my great pleasure to introduce Bruce Sterling. You've got all his credentials in the handout. I hope you've read some of his books. If you haven't, after you hear him speak, you're going to want to. I've long been of the opinion that the people leading the way for technology in our society are science fiction authors. And Bruce is much more than a science fiction author. He writes a lot of nonfiction. You can see his work in Wired regularly. Just Google him and see all the exciting things that he's involved in. I am so honored and delighted that we are privileged to have him here for several days. He's eminently accessible, as Brad pointed out this morning. Please do interact with him, and I'd like to welcome Bruce Sterling now.
So we've got an obligatory tech hassle, even though I'm bringing my notes on paper. You know, I've been to tech gigs where there are as many as 4 people at a time clustered around the podium trying to get the graphics to work. I love that. Okay, so, engineering software people. A key demographic in making my designer dreams come true. I'm very happy to be here, and to be chatting with you today. I came here to learn rather than to teach. But what the heck, I'm here. Let's preach a little. Let's just make this happen. Okay, so you got this free, shiny little handout book. I mean, everybody gets one in their bag, and I'm the guy who wrote this, and here it is, tra-la-la. Are you really going to, rush home and read the shiny free book from the convention? Probably not. I mean, me neither. I never read them. So, let me just give you, the 10 or even 6 minute executive briefing on kind of why I wrote this thing and what it's all about. Well, it's about ubiquitous computing, which is not a new idea. It's kind of an old idea. It's made up by Mark Weiser at Xerox PARC, great computer visionary, no longer with us. I've been aware of these ideas almost since he published them quite some time ago, and I've been thinking, this is the kind of thing that'll really matter in about 15 years. And by golly, about 15 years passed. And I figured it was about time for some of Mark's notions to be really mattering. And some of them do things like pads, tablets, the kind of ubiquitous movement of software from one device to another. A lot of the things that Mark said were extremely prescient. He really was a visionary. So I decided I was going to write some real kick-ass science fiction about some of these notions because it's kind of breaking out. And then as I started thinking about it, I began to realize that there was sort of a problem with ubiquitous computing, and I think that the problem is, first of all, it's not ubiquitous, and second of all, it's not computing. When I actually started thinking about it from a design point of view, which is commonly the way I approach technical speculation these days, I thought that the key to it was not ubiquitous computation, which is sort of like a broadcast computation of intelligence that covers the world like paint. A better way to approach it is more like an Internet of Things. Just think that's like a better way to kind of phrase the prospect of what UbiComp would look like. And what is an Internet of Things? Well, it's ubiquitous computation. It's also ambient and pervasive and physical computing. But then I started to wonder, well, what is a thing within an Internet of Things? What's the sort of least possible size? What's the citizen within an Internet of Things? What's kind of the individual pixel of an Internet of Things? What does a thing look like when it's an Internet of Things? I mean, what's a native thing in an Internet of Things? And this is sort of a design approach. I mean, what's it do in your hand? I mean, what's the shape of it? How does it behave? How is it different from the things we know now? So I decided to give it a name. It's like an object, because I didn't want to use the other terms, ambient, physical, ubiquitous. They kind of describe things that are already taken. I decided to call it a spime. A spime because that didn't seem to be used for any other purpose. And it kind of rolls off the tongue, and it's sort of like, well, I got a spime, and this is spimier, and you can spime it, and that was spime, and they didn't spime that, and I'm selling a lot of spimes, and it just sort of sounded good, and my designer friends kind of liked it. So a spime is a thing that's a native to an Internet of Things. So, what's different about it? Well, it has properties from 6 major tech trends that I have been looking at for a long time, and none of them had anything to do with the way the 20th century used to do things. But they all seemed to be coming on, and they were kind of native 21st century things. And I was sort of making lists of them and checking them off, and it suddenly occurred to me that there was kind of a synergy there, that these 6 new kind of tech trends were kind of adding up, and they all had something to do with things and physicality. So I just want to list those. All right, first of all, ideation, planning, and design. I mean, these aren't new things. We've been doing them since, we could chip rocks. But doing them online is new. So a spime is created through CAD/CAM. I mean, it's just a virtual object before it's ever a physical object. And the discussions about it are on the web, and the original thoughts are on the web, and everybody is collaborating on the web, merely to think things up. Second, it has a unique identity, which is kind of an information architecture problem. But, it's a code, or in any case, any spime just has maybe an IPv6 address, maybe an EAN UCC code, something along that line. But it's just, every spime is different, and you know what it is, and it's kind of in there in a registry, and it can be tracked using a unique ID. And it's an electronic ID. It's a virtual ID. And it has an ID before it comes to physically exist. Then it's manufactured. And I figure that's fabbed. It's fabricated. It's made by some device that takes a virtual plan and makes it into a physical object with as few steps as possible. Basically, you're looking at rapid manufacturing, rapid prototyping, just taking something, jam it through the printer, out it comes, kind of pop it. Now it's trackable. It's geolocative, which is something we didn't have for objects before. We couldn't really watch them move around the planet, know where they were, locate them in urban spaces, room spaces, city spaces, nation spaces. We didn't have the ability to geolocatively track objects, but now we can. Then fifth, it's searchable. There are search engines specifically set up so they can find these things, shop for them, look for them, compare notes about them, figure out what other was like, what the earlier versions were like, and so forth. We couldn't do that in the 20th century. Now you can do it every day. You can Google it. You can Amazon it. You can go look for its Flickr set. Just different methods of finding physical objects in the world, figuring out what they're attached to. Sixth, it's recyclable. Now, we've made some efforts to recycle stuff before, but it's very expensive, generally because we don't know what they are. I mean, they kind of come off the back of a dump truck, and we don't actually have a list of the contents of the object. Now, if you actually know what an object is made of, who made it, where it came from, where it's been, it's actually worth a little bit more when you recycle it at the end, because it's sort of easier to pull apart. You can actually turn it into a business. In fact, you can turn it into a business and get rid of it if it's noxious, because somebody will pay to get rid of stuff that's actually difficult. So we have kind of a new relationship between ourselves and junk. If junk has enough information on it, it's not junk anymore, really. And then as a last item, it leaves behind a pool of metadata, which our objects didn't really do before. But these objects, these spimes that I'm talking about, are so surrounded by ubiquity that they actually leave a little historical record behind after they cease to exist physically. And you can sort of make some use of that. I mean, you could fold that back to the ideation process at the beginning and sort of say, well, what exactly did the customer do with our stuff? I mean, where exactly did it go? Where was it used? And each one of these things, instead of being abandoned at the factory door to sort of wander its way through the world, is instead generating little puddles of interaction. Right? And these are valuable, and eventually these little puddles, this knowledge that we have about how our things really behave, becomes more important than the physical objects themselves. Now, it's like owning a share in a company. You wouldn't want to buy pieces of a company. You want to buy shares in a company. And you don't really want to buy stuff in a spime world. You want to buy information about spimes. Information about spimes is where the action is. It's how people relate to it, how they interact with it, how they buy it, how they decide whether it's good or bad. And the object itself just becomes a kind of hard copy. So a spime is sometimes a physical object, but it's generally a chunk of information. Right? So that's a thing that's native to an Internet of Things. Okay, I know that's a lot to swallow. It took me 150 pages to do it, but hey, you can read it in the morning. I did a nice graphic for it. If you're on Flickr, which I am, you can just look up the word spime, and there's like some beautiful little pictures I drew and like a little flow chart. And sometimes people say, now I get it, and this seems kind of simple, and I wonder why this is a challenging idea, and it's kind of obvious, and that's the victory condition. I mean, really, you want to move from, I completely don't understand what this guy is talking about, to, oh, well, that's just completely obvious, which is, that's it. I mean, that's fabulous. So, my book came out, and it got some nice reviews, and, MIT Press did it, and it's pink, and, it's got cute graphic design, and I was kind of happy with it. And it was a modest success. I mean, it's a design book, and I was a design academic for a little while, and normally I write science fiction novels, and this thing's just full of design theory, and it's kind of aimed at a design audience, and designers like it because it says sweet things about them and so forth and so on. But when I wrote the book, I claimed that I thought there would be a spime world in about 30 years. And that was 2004, so, we're like 10% of the way there. So instead of simply, burdening you with my gorgeous little publication here, I want to, try and bring you up to speed in the remaining time we have for what's happened since I, came up with this theory and how things seem to be working out. And, does it really have any traction? And, does it actually make any sense? Or is it really just, a bunch of amusing sci-fi hand-waving? Well, there is a book that just came out, which is a book done by Art Center College of Design, where I was in residence as I was working on this book, a book called Ecology of Things, which is about my design class, who are doing some work with sunspots, which you may or may not know are little laboratory devices that sort of wirelessly ship chunks of Java code. So my students and I were kind of working on this, and we did this little blue sky thing, and now the book's come out. So, if you're interested in that, you could go look at that. One of my students in particular, a guy named Jeb Burke, he had some minor success by putting these communicating objects into little toy blimps. They became a kind of school of airborne fish, and they kind of wander around autonomously moaning at one another and kind of moving from place to place. He's an engineer, God bless him. An engineer in design school, and he put together this thing, and it got some press, and it was sexy, and it's a lot of fun and kind of an existence proof in some way. There's a colleague of mine named Julian Bleeker, who is also an engineer. He's an electrical engineer. And he's written, I did not know him until I had finished this book, and then I realized that he's been working on something similar. He has a concept called blogjics, which are objects that can blog. In other words, they're objects that have sort of a social presence. They actually have something to say about where they are and what they're using. And quite commonly, he thinks they ought to be covered with, say, environmental sensors. So, Julian is somebody who's working in this area. And blogjics, I think, is kind of an interesting first step towards spimes, a kind of something you can do. And he's promulgating his own work. There's a gentleman named Timo Arnal, who is a designer who works for Nokia, among other enterprises. And he's very into near-field communication, which is handheld objects interacting with little electrical fields. Might be radio frequency ID chips and so forth. He does a lot of conceptual work in a kind of similar related space. He's somebody I pay a lot of attention to, Timo Arnal. There's another theory writer whom I also knew nothing about until my book had appeared. His name is Adam Greenfield, and he wrote a book about ubiquitous computing called Everywhere, Everyware, which is kind of an information architect's or web designer's take on how you would interact with Ubiquity. I thought that was a very interesting book. And he's a charming fellow and has a lot to say on the subject. And then there's a last book by a gentleman named Peter Morville, who's an information architect, and he wrote a book called Ambient Findability, which is about what it's like to be able to just plain find stuff, physical stuff, not have to look for your shoes ever again. I mean, what kind of world does it look like when a world is sort of information architected and intensely digitally searchable on a physical level? You can really find physical stuff. And he's into library science, he's into taxonomies, folksonomies, these kinds of tracking and ranking systems. I think that's a very interesting kind of addition to the debate there. I learned a lot from reading that book. So, are we 10% of the way there? How's it working out with my grand theory? Well, my theory or notion, to work out, I think you'd have to say that there would have to be some convergence among these 6 things. And if I'm right about spimes kind of coming in, then you ought to see things like CAD/CAM programs that also involve automatic unique identity, or a manufacturing fabbing system that is also geolocatively trackable, or maybe a unique identity which is uniquely searchable in some way, or a designer thing that's sort of a design for disassembly. In other words, you'd see these 6 factors kind of bleeding over, and you'd see little hybrid enterprises popping up, trying to turn them all into sort of one grand system. Is that actually happening? Or is there any sort of evidence on the ground? Google Earth SketchUp, I think, is about as close as you get. Okay, you got SketchUp, which is a CAD/CAM program, and then you've got Google Earth, which is this geolocative thing. It's like, okay, how come CAD/CAM got geolocative in Google Earth SketchUp? I mean, objectively speaking, do these things have anything to do with one another? I don't know, but if you actually look at Google Earth SketchUp, it does kind of make a weird kind of sense, actually. And, the guys involved seem to speak the same language, and, there seems to be some kind of synergy happening there. People complain about it because they're not sure it's actually making money. I'm not sure that's entirely the point. I mean, the thing about something like Google Earth SketchUp is that it's just hard to imagine doing without it once you kind of get deep into it. One of these strange enterprises. Now, we've got these 6 vectors that I talked about, the identity and the fabbability and the searchability and the trackability. Are they all going to grow at the same rate, right? And I don't think that they would. So, I kind of think about them in this very smooth kind of design theory way, but on the ground I would expect to see a lot of jostling and some kind of moving forward in a herky-jerky fashion and others not working at all or perhaps sort of having nothing to do with it. 3 years on, locative stuff, very big. I mean, if you're, in Wired, I just did a piece for Wired. I've done another piece on locative stuff. I mean, the buzz on locativity is very hot suddenly. And the buzz phrase for 2007 there would be location aware. And, what does that mean exactly? Well, I think it's just another kind of take on ubiquity, ambience, physicality, and so forth. That's kind of a new entry into the buzzword sweepstakes. Location aware. You have devices that know where they are. They don't know where they are, but they can sort of publicize it, and you can build a platform on it. Right? You can tag stuff with its GPS coordinates. You can move things from one area to another. Radio frequency ID, which I talk about a great deal in this book. It got some traction. It's not in full retreat, but it ran into political difficulties. RFID tags, I think, have a difficult model. They're kind of a CompuServe model in an internet universe because the original RFID mandates came from Walmart and the Defense Department. When Walmart and the Defense Department were both kind of at the full flush of their glory, and it was like, the Defense Department was winning wars all over the place and, kind of covering the earth with American military power, whereas Walmart had a superstore in practically every town of consequence. And the two of them were able to sort of say, all right, suppliers, you're going to be attaching these tags to everything because we say so. In point of fact, the Internet never worked like that. The Internet is much more about sort of, I'll get my own machine, and then I will link up to you with the same protocols, and we'll kind of ship stuff back and forth, and you're big and I'm small, but you're not going to charge me, and I'm not going to charge you, and we're just going to like puddle our stuff together. If you look at the kind of prehistory of the Internet, you see a lot of things like Trintex or Prodigy, which was an effort by, say, CBS and Sears to kind of give everybody an electronic address, if you're old enough to remember that. And these efforts failed because they were, in fact, mandated, and they didn't really have much for the individual guy. So instead of RFID, which I think is coming on, you're starting to see other forms of things pop up, like real-time locative systems, RTLS, which is sort of an active RFID thing that's also geolocative. And it's not mandated by the Defense Department or by Walmart, but it seems to actually work for people on the ground. They actually derive some kind of benefit from it. They don't merely have to have their arm twisted. They actually want to install these devices. And a second thing that's popped up quite recently that I'm paying a lot of attention to is a sudden flurry of 2D graphic barcodes, which interoperate with camera phones. So you're starting to see these odd-looking malformed checkerboard devices. And there's like 6 or 7 competing formats. But you just take a picture of it with your cell phone, and the cell phone software immediately recognizes this graphic image and then takes you to a website or a phone number or something along that line. It could be a location address. It could be a mapping point. It's kind of a graphic version of an RFID chip. I had no idea those things existed 3 years ago. You will not hear a whisper about it in my book. Yet they're popping up, and I think they kind of fit in with my idea. And they're kind of this year's model. And I think it's interesting that there's so many of them and that they're so street level. Some of them actually try to get teenagers to involve themselves in it. They have more of a MySpace kind of democratic grassroots feeling. And they're kind of an anti-RFID that achieves a lot of the same purposes. Some of them are clever enough, these photo operating handheld things. Some of them are clever enough to actually recognize brands. In other words, if you have, a Death Star logo, the new AT&T, you can simply take a picture of the logo and be sent to AT&T's website because the thing recognizes. That's strange because brands are everywhere, and the idea of them becoming a kind of portal between the virtual and the actual is a sexy and different idea. Cell phones, I think, are coming on much stronger than anybody thought. The iPhone rollout was exciting to me because it does look spime-like. Here you've got this tablet, kind of a classic Xerox PARC, ubiquitous computing tablet. It's got no buttons on it. It's got hand manipulable images. It interacts with Google Maps. It's a navigation system. It's a phone. It's also a web application. It's a giant photo thing. You can hold it up, take big pictures with it, geotag the pictures, move them online, so forth and so on. The idea that iPhones should be moving around kind of, I think, plays to my notions in this. Of course, every journalist in the world loved iPhones, but I kind of like them as a design theorist. I don't know. And cell phones themselves are spreading. I mean, they're spreading extremely rapidly. They're outpacing laptops by a long chalk, and they're also moving out into the general world. And people who are into ubiquitous computing are kind of starting to realize that it's cell phones that are the existence proof of UbiComp. Cell phones are the little handheld portals that kind of, as Julian Bleecker puts it, they laminate the virtual and the actual. You got them on your pocket. They're sort of with you all the time. They're getting increasingly handy. They're becoming extremely multi-purpose. They're not just phones, they're also cameras and house keys and car keys and micro-payment systems, and they're geolocative devices, and they've got GPS, and maybe they're alerting to Wi-Fi, and they've got some Bluetooth, and you could WiMAX them. They're moving through little puddles of wireless instead of the ultimate wireless portable knick-knack. There's sort of an explosion of interest there. You got cheap models, expensive models, military models, right? WiMAX is something I didn't talk much about, just the idea of drenching systems and things. The open spectrum effort to sort of repurpose some television signals to use them for broadcast internet. I didn't talk about that, but it would change the world in the ways that I've gone. Is there a problem with my scheme? I mean, I'm sitting here patting myself on the back for my tremendous insight. I mean, what did I get that was just like dead wrong? Well, I think like most science fiction writers, I'm really interested in stuff that's sort of technologically sexy but doesn't have much real world pull. And fabricators have that problem. Fabricators, well, I just wrote a science fiction story about fabricators, actually, and it's one of my best science fiction stories ever, which makes me think that it's probably not much use. But there's a romance about fabricators, and there are people who are working on, say, fabricators for fabricators, replicating, rep-raps, as they call them, replicating fabricators, and that you can make a fabricator with a fabricator. And there's just something really glorious and sexy about the idea of, like, you see your image there in Rhino or SolidWorks, and you just, like, hit the F1 function key, and it just pops right out of the laser printer. I've just, like, got one, like an Australian rabbit. And that's just such a, it's such an exciting and intoxicating and hackerly idea that I don't think it's really that likely to happen. There's really not much of a sensible business reason to make a device that can make other devices. It's like a really cool science fiction idea. I mean, maybe in something like a Martian robot that could land and autonomously make other Martian robots somewhere without human intervention, that might make a certain amount of design sense. But if you just look at just the everyday engineering nature of trying to make useful objects, it's just much cheaper to use more conventional methods of manufacturing, and you don't make every single replicator part with a replicator. You just have replicators, and I would predict that they would chew away at the kind of installed base of what we've got, but they're not going to sort of replace it wholesale in some kind of, marvelous nanotech tidal wave where everything we own is made of nanocarbon fiber or artificial diamond. Sexy as that is, I hate to kiss that idea goodbye. I could be wrong about it, but I don't know. It's just, there's something suspect about it. 3 years later, I'm kind of regretting it a little bit. Other objects I overlooked, things like social software, crowdsourcing. My colleagues at Wired Magazine are very taken with this. They really like these kind of Web 2.0 news aggregator kind of services. And I think that in an Internet of Things, you'd see a lot of that. I mean, you're going to see like news aggregation centered around physical objects. In other words, instead of like trying to scare up a user group for your software, basically every object is going to accumulate a user group of some kind. I mean, everything that has an identity will have some kind of portal in and out where people can comment on it, complain about it, ask for help, suggest improvements, curse you, engage in PR battles. You're going to see the stuff that you already do in order to like spread your software base attached to stuff like bicycles, bicycle tires, hats, shoes. Right? Everything, just because it's sort of a portal for commentary and a way to attach stuff to things. Now, is there a business for this? If you actually point this out that it's become possible, it's like, okay, well, why would I do that? And I think there's an interesting counterexample is like Wikipedia. There isn't a business model for Wikipedia. You know, it just sort of keeps accumulating information about stuff. And even like really small stuff is in Wikipedia. You know, and you would think, okay, well, you know, they're going to run out of bandwidth. I don't think so. I mean, you know, bandwidth is going to increase. Storage is increasing extremely fast, and you can put huge kinds of, and it's like, okay, well, who's going to pay for Wikipedia? I mean, who pays Wikipedia contributors? They don't get paid. You know, I mean, if you're a retired history professor and you're looking at Wikipedia and it says something, oh, the Battle of Leipzig in 1539, and you're like, it was 1538 and I can prove it. You know, it's like gardening for knowledgeable people who are sort of no longer in the mainstream. Or if you're a student and you've just written, you know, a thesis paper about some obscure subject and you go on Wikipedia and it's like, well, that's all wrong. You just rewrite the thing. I mean, you've already done the work. And it's not that much of a difficulty. So you get these kinds of socially generated clouds of information around stuff. I don't talk about it much in my book. I mean, there's sort of a section where I make a few little head fakes and hints about it. I think it's a bigger deal than I suspected. And I think it might even be the determining deal, that you're going to see new kinds of design that are based on mollifying people within social software groups more than, you know, actually sort of efficient. In other words, if you can get people to blog about your stuff, you're going to get more market traction than you will by making something that actually functions. You know, I mean, you know, I know that sounds a little alien to engineers. But it's basically what you were told earlier today. You know, it's like, okay, you've got your black hole of actual engineering expertise here, and you kind of need the outside shell of where civilians kind of interact with the device. Well, you know, the outside shell is increasingly socially generated on the net. And it used to be you just hire a designer, and he'd literally put a shell around it. You know, Raymond Loewy would go, I'll streamline it. You know, it's like, thank you, Raymond. But now you're starting to see these shells, and yeah, they kind of come up to the black hole edge because they're not actually engineers, but they are users. And they will come up and they will sort of laminate, you know, commentary on your product, and this is sort of what the outside world sees about your device. You know, so if your device is in a position to sort of generate a big, thick shell, it's just going to out-expand the others. And, you know, and bury them. And I guess that would be called customer relations management, except I don't really think it's managed at all. You know, on the contrary, it's like you have the ability to provoke some interaction, but your ability to control what happens there is quite limited. Oh, and it's really a design problem, and in some ways it's a social software design problem. I didn't talk about it very much. I'm starting to see new terms coming up about it. You're seeing, you know, Dig, Reddit-style news aggregator things. There's, you know, a lot of action in the kind of Web 2.0 space, the Web 3.0 space. You know, not to mention that not all of these developments are going to be commercial at all. I would think that the ability to track objects, manufacture them, track them, search them, in the way I'm describing would have very strong military applications. And emergency rescue applications, medical applications, an operating room is kind of perfect for something like this. I mean, we want to track every sort of surgical thing, misplace nothing. You know, where would it actually work? And you know, and my prediction would be that it would start as little sort of pinpoints or kind of little areas of early adoption where people really, really need to sort of know everything about everything at all times. You know, the inside of a nuclear plant, let's say, or an airliner's cockpit. And then you would see these sort of intense areas of early adoption and spread out into more general civilian use in a very classic kind of, as opposed to the model of ubiquitous computing, which is sort of like we build a big antenna and we cover the earth with an even layer No, I don't think that's how it would work. I could be proven wrong. My biggest oversight, and the one that's really kind of cost me, I didn't think about the interface design. I really thought that once I had this kind of, design insight and a new way that people and humans and objects could relate, that was enough. But then when I actually started trying to describe what daily life is like in a spime world, I realized it was all about the screens. Because this sort of, these interactions, the tracking, the searching, and so forth, it's basically all invisible. And you would not really say, my spime wine glass here is a mass tracked object. It's a mass searched object. It's not remarkable any more than that it's a mass produced object. And that just doesn't pop up to you. And the question is, what does pop up to you? And how is it presented to you? And how do you sort of look at it? And how do you see these processes, which are mostly cybernetic and invisible? I mean, how do you interact with a barcode? How do you interact with an interactive object? How does it foist itself on your attention? What do you say to it? And the classic notion is that, your refrigerator automatically orders milk, and your refrigerators or appliances are somehow conspiring behind your back to run your kitchen in a kind of smart environment. That is going nowhere. I mean, that idea is 30, 40 years old. It will never work. It's never going to work. I mean, we really need an Internet of Things, and we need a browser for an Internet of Things, and sort of a Twitter and like pop-up boxes for an Internet of Things. And I've been working on this for a long time. I mean, I've been working on a science fiction novel about it, and I'm trying all different kinds of methods in my science fiction novel. There's like head-mounted displays and little handheld devices, and I'm kind of like working my way through the various things that seem to me to be possible. But it's a really critical problem, and although I'm a design critic, I am not an interface designer. And the more I learn about that, the more I recognize it as the kind of major challenge in the issue, and one that I'm not very good at. And I didn't describe it much at all in my book. There's a few terms like wands, shopping wands, but I'm just blue skying it there. I really don't know. I really don't know how you interact with an Internet of Things and derive any value from it. I think I know where the value is. I just don't know how it works. I mean, how you sort of get up in the morning and sort of go about it in a plausible way. And it's tough. It's a really tough problem. I mean, I hang out with information architecture people and, sort of website guys. I don't know. I'm coming up dry there. I'm kind of aching for it. It's a real hassle. The surface of this system. What's the human interface to this system? What does it say? Who owns it? Who runs it? Is it Microsoft Windows for things? Is it open source? Is there a different thing for different kinds of things? Maybe it's geographically divided, as Adam Greenfield suggests. Maybe there's different layers of it because the real world has scale. Maybe there's bodyware, and then roomware, and then buildingware, and then streetware, and then cityware. And each of these is sort of busy different entities. The mayor's got the cityware, and then there's stateware, and nationware, and globalware. And you shouldn't expect to interact with a passing nuclear aircraft carrier, which would be globalware, the same way that you would with, say, your toothbrush or your shoes, which are personal wear. But if that's the case, who divides those up? How do you know? And where is the permission? Where's the differential permissioning? Okay, well, it's keeping me busy. And I think, a critical question. Why should this happen at all? I mean, I just talked about it for almost a solid hour here. Obviously there's a lot of potential here. It's something people have been talking about for a long time. It's something people in the industry have been discussing for a long time. Weiser talked about it. People have been sort of making head fakes about it. What's the killer app for Ubiquity? I mean, would you want stuff that's ambient? I mean, what's wrong with just sort of leaving it on the desktop and getting on with your life? In my book, I make this kind of long argument that there's a historical inevitability to it. That if you look at what we have done with our objects, since the dawn of time, we've tried to embed as much information in them as possible. And this is just sort of the next step in embedding information basically into everything, into the everyday object. I mean, stuff, all of stuff. The environment and creative objects, which is everything. I think the killer application is sustainability. Because this is another problem we've had for a long time that we really haven't gotten much traction on. It's a slow problem, but it's a very serious one. What is ubiquity for? I think ubiquity is for the environment. They're the same term. The environment's basically everything. It's everything that we're in. And ubiquity is for everythingness. Ubiquity is about everythingness. It's the technology of everythingness. It's an everywhere technology. And we have serious problems with the stuff we emit into the environment that we don't track and keep track of. Stuff like exhaust fumes, toxins, bioaccumulative substances. One doesn't have to be taught these things. Environmentalists have been beating the drum about it for decades. They've gone unaddressed for decades. Problems become acute. It gets ugly. I mean, it's a 200-year-old problem, sustainability. And I think ubiquity offers us a way out of this. Now, basically, to put on my design hat, for one last time here, there are three theories about how to actually have a sustainable society. One that leaves as many opportunities to our children as we ourselves inherited from the past. We're not foreclosing things that they can do. That's my definition of sustainability. It's a society that can go on and is not delimiting its possibilities. Okay, there are three ways to do it. Well, four, really, because way number 0 is to fail at it and drop dead. That's kind of the Easter Island solution. You could read, Jared Diamond's great book, Collapse, and have a long series of, exact kind of descriptions on how not to go about having a civilization. Okay, that's solution 0. We don't do anything, and we just catch it in the neck, and so, great. Okay, number 1 solution is permanence. It's kind of the arts and crafts and also modernist design solution. It's like we really look at the problem and we come up with a solution. I mean, we just analyze it and we come up with a perfect kind of great solution for it. And, we just kind of strip it down to the minimal things that are needed to accomplish it, and we make it, and it's sort of great, and we just keep it, and we don't have to make any more. Okay, that isn't going to work. Because, well, let's just say, you're a designer, or let's say you're a software engineer in that world, and somebody's already come up with this. So, all your life you've been using your grandmother's china and crystal. Because, it's beautiful china and beautiful crystal, and she has the entire set of forks, including the oyster forks and the oyster knife, and so forth. And this is a kind of perfect dining solution. Except, being a programmer, you want to eat takeout Szechuan food over the sink. Because, you got deadlines, and that's what you do, Okay, well, in a permanent design solution world, you cannot do that. I mean, there's no chopsticks, there's no cardboard, there's no Szechuan food. You're going to eat off grandma's silver with the napkin, And you better not put your elbows on it, because your grandmother never stood for that. So every object is a frozen techno-social relationship, including your grandmother's china and her silver and her crystal. So if you buy into the china, the silver, and the crystal, you are stuck in a techno-social status that you can never escape. You will never make a significant decision about what you eat with. You have delimited your ability, your grandchildren's ability. Your grandchildren, you have solved all your problems for them. They will never make a significant decision about anything that affects their lives. They will be the puppets of your perfect, permanent solutions. If this had been inflicted on us by our grandparents, we would have violently rebelled. It's just not going to work. It's a great arts and crafts notion. You can see some beautiful argumentation about it in the early days of modernism. It has failed. It's not going to work. It's never going to work. That's not what sustainability is. You can cross that one off. Number 2 method of achieving some sustainability. Let stuff rot. And instead of having junk and kind of permanent things that are sort of, slowly accumulate in our biosphere and do a lot of ecological damage, we just make everything from organic, biomimicry style materials. We get rid of the chlorine and internal combustion engines and a lot of these other kinds of affronts, and we start making things out of horn and coral and bamboo and hemp and plaster, cellulosic ethanol, and they're all beautiful materials, and they're kind of pleasant to look at, and who can't like polished wood? And if you leave it alone, it's just bio-reduced, and, it sort of goes away. And you don't have to worry about it because, everything that you made has a sell-by date, and it's just folded back into the biosphere, and the biosphere handles all our recycling services. All right? I think this idea is gorgeous. I'm very into biomimicry. I don't think we ought to sit on our hands about it. I think it has some severe problems. Like I have some Nike considered shoes, which are kind of gorgeous, eco-chic kind of little boots. And they're made of cork and hemp and, all organic materials, and they're sort of designed for disassembly and so forth. Great shoes, they actually are decomposing on my feet. That's the intention. They're supposed to decompose. It's like bread with no preservatives rots faster. Guaranteed healthy crop of mold. So, I still wear my shoes because I think they're sexy, but, I only wear them on specific social occasions because they're basically eco-chic gear. They're not ready for prime time. I'm not going to get a lot of use out of these oddly smelling cork-lined shoes, even though they're super sexy and kind of, right in that kind of biodegradable design philosophy, right? So I don't think we ought to sit on our hands about that, but I think it may be some decades away before we could do such a thing. Really just have a completely biodegradable industrial system. If you could do it, more power to you. I'm just not sure it's entirely workable. And then the third version of achieving a sustainable society, is the one that I describe in this book, which is sort of new and it's not thought of until the 21st century, which is to just number it all, name it all, and track it all. All, really. Just come up with a system to put the toys away properly. Just put them away because you got them named and numbered and you know what's in them and where they've been. And it's our first opportunity, as a species or as a civilization to actually understand what we are doing in detail with our objects and possessions. We kind of never know. Somehow you know how to make them, but then you kick them out the door and you don't know what people do with them. Or you bought one, but you don't know where it came from or where it's going. Or you don't know what they're related to or what other people bought with them and so forth. We've just never had the kind of level of insight into physical objects that we might now conceivably get. It's a new idea. It's a visionary idea. I was the visionary in residence at Art Center of Design. They said, you're a science fiction writer. You have some far-out notions about design. Yes, I do. Very far-out notions. I'm not the guy who's going to do this. It's people like you who are going to do this if it gets done at all. It's up to me to preach it. I can't possibly make it happen. It's people just like the people in this room, you and your little associated entities. If it happens, you're going to be right up against it. You're actually going to see it happen. It's fun to be an event with such great material and so much direct relevance to my own work. Thank you for having me in. I look forward to a very edifying event here. You have a lot to teach me, and I came here to learn. I'm going to go out and do an hour in a room here presently. If you'd like to drop by and discuss this stuff, let's have at it. Thank you for your attention.